Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying today's exciting sessions. I'm Daniela Fayer, publisher at Defense One, and I'm delighted to continue the conversation today with Ron Keesing, Vice President for AI at Leidos. Ron, welcome. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in Defense Outlook for 2022, and to talk a little bit about the importance of AI and how it is going to affect defense in 2022. My role here at Leidos, as you mentioned, is VP for AI, and I lead our AI practice across the company, as well as our AI ML accelerator, which is kind of our A team of AI engineers and scientists within the Office of Technology who work on our hardest problems.
Thank you so much for that context. I think it'll help our audience understand our conversation today. And I want to let's just dive right in and talk about AI in defense applications. My first question, it's kind of a lofty one, but I wanted to ask you about the legal, moral, and ethical concerns around fielding AI in defense applications.
Thank you so much for asking about this, and it's something that we think a lot about here at Leidos. And the reason is, as we look at barriers toward the integration of AI into DoD capabilities, it's really critical that we understand how to build AI that can actually address these legal, moral, and ethical concerns. So unpacking that a little bit, legally, AI, there is existing and strong DoD guidance around how to build AI and how to constrain the behavior of AI. For example, Directive DoD 3000.09 lays out rules, for example, for autonomous weapons systems. And there are broader international and US laws that govern how AI systems and autonomous systems should behave and what the limitations on them are. I think one of the key concepts there is human governance, that ultimately we need to build AI systems that humans control so that when high consequence decisions that could lead to human deaths are taking place, that humans ultimately are taking responsibility for any of those decisions, and those aren't just delegated to an AI system. That's really an important core principle, and it's something we work on here at Leidos. For example, on the DARPA ACE program, we've been doing a lot of work on how we can actually design a reinforcement learning architecture where AI can help humans in the command and control process, but ultimately humans can actually intervene with that AI system at any point to help make sure that and override any decision that AI system could make. So the humans ultimately set the goals, and that means that humans are governing what the system does, and then also even how the system does it. Humans can intervene at every level, or they can delegate authority to the machine, as long as it's ultimately the human who's making the ultimate decision about use of force. And I think morally and ethically, though, people also have these concerns about AI systems. None of us want to be building AI that is like Skynet in the Terminator movies or HAL 9000 from 2001. So how do we avoid building AI like that? DoD's also released a set of ethical principles, to address needs like building AI that's responsible and ethical and traceable and reliable and, as I mentioned, governable. All of those are really important pieces. Now, here, within my experience, all of these legal, these moral and ethical concerns really come down to building AI that behaves in ways that humans feel they can trust, right? Because we have a sense of how humans behave as moral agents and the ethical responsibilities we have to each other. And we trust each other when we see that those rules are followed. And so we also want to build AI systems that behave in that same trusted way and adhere to our ethical and moral sense. And that's one of the really big challenges that we're taking on, and that I think everyone in this industry is working on hard.
Well, I know at Defense One, we talk a lot about AI. It is, part of the reality. We have a series, Genius Machines, that we've been doing for a few years now. And, some of the conversations there, and something I'd like to ask you about it, are there issues, legal, moral, and ethical LME issues around not fielding AI? Can AI actually help us be more virtuous, or, is it something that we should consider limiting? What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a great question because so often this conversation around AI is and ethics in AI is framed in purely negative terms. So this fear that AI is going to do something terrible. And we rarely actually think about the costs of not using AI. So let's step back a moment and talk about what DoD's mission and purpose is. I mean, ultimately, DoD has responsibility for warfighting. And warfighting by its nature is full of legal, moral, and ethical implications. We know from experience that humans are imperfect moral agents, and we know their ability to make high consequence decisions is imperfect, even under the best circumstances. Those decisions often get even worse when, the human mind is clouded by things like fear and exhaustion and hunger that are really occur in warfighting situations. And we also know that humans are having to make these decisions increasingly in an information overwhelming environment where they're just bombarded constantly by uncertain information that's hard for an individual human to process and make sense of. So what are the implications then? I mean, ultimately, if AI can actually help humans to make better and more moral decisions, then if we hold back on fielding AI, we may actually be making a worse ethical choice than if we restrict AI out of the fear that it's going to actually do ethically terrible things. So not putting AI into the hands of warfighters actually has its own moral hazards that we really need to think and talk about and address more clearly. So, for example, often you'll hear examples of what if AI made a mistake and mistook a school bus full of kids for a tank. Well, I mean, first of all, yes, we want to build AI systems that are robust and not going to fail in those ways, and that's the responsibility of the scientists and engineers and data scientists who build these models. But frankly, collateral damage does happen on the battlefield today. So the question we also need to ask is, could AI make it less likely that our current warfighting would cause mistakes like that to happen? As we do these things, it needs to be a balanced conversation. That's why we're trying to really broaden this conversation around AI ethics in terms of not just how do we, make sure that AI doesn't do something bad, but how do we actually build AI systems that enable humans to be more virtuous when they work with these machines, to act as sort of, help them understand situations better so that they can make better and more moral and ethical decisions. And I think that's a conversation that we'd love to be engaging in more broadly, and we'd love to see other people thinking about as well. We're going to be sponsoring a conference with Catholic University in early 2022 on this very issue of can actually AI help improve human ethics?
Well, I personally really like the idea that AI can help us make better decisions and be more virtuous in our endeavors as human beings, even in defense of the nation. So I want to dig into that a little bit more and ask you if you provided one example. Are there other examples where this is already happening? And you're seeing progress?
Sure. So one of the examples, that's often cited as a problem in AI ethics is around bias and fairness. We have this concern because we've produced models, and it's very easy to build a machine learning model that replicates and even amplifies human bias when it learns from human data. But when you step back and think about this, you realize that this really isn't a problem about AI. This is a problem about human ethics and human biases that exist in the real world. Now, there's a whole lot of research going on in the AI community about how we can actually remove the bias from these models and build models that actually adhere to fairness criteria we really want. If we can do that, imagine this as an ethical assistant to humans, right? Imagine a human processing a mortgage application who may have some unconscious biases that affect the decisions they make. And AI could essentially help those humans to recognize times when, their decisions may be affected by unconscious biases, and that the fairest decision they could make is a little different from the one they might intuitively make. In that way, AI could actually function as essentially a way to help humans behave better. And we're already working on and building those kinds of solutions today. So I think AI has already forced us to ask some important questions about human ethics and to dive deep into what the data tells us about them. And we're already thinking about ways that AI is going to help make a lot of human behavior better. We're just not really thinking about it that way.
Earlier, you mentioned the importance of human trust. I think that's a really important point. And I'd love to hear why you think trust is important in AI adoption?
Sure. So, human trust is something that I think is really the cornerstone of the human AI relationship that we want to build in the future. If humans don't trust AI, they won't use it, right? And so, when we look at a lot of AI failures, a lot of AI barriers, that have happened, even with well-designed AI systems, they've been problems in human trust. Ultimately, humans don't have a comfort level that the AI will do what it's intended to do and won't do something terribly wrong that's unexpected. So how do we build that human trust? First off, we need to think about what human trust really looks like and who the stakeholders are. So for Leidos, we think about these stakeholders, being users who often, and we have the experience. I think many people who've worked in AI for a long time have the experience of seeing humans turn off AI systems or ignore AI recommendations when they don't trust them. You probably had the experience of kind of bad recommendation systems or ads that stream to you that seem silly, and you just start ignoring that bad information that you get from badly designed AI. So user trust is really important. Otherwise, humans just ignore what AI tells them. Another really important stakeholder are the systems and missions owners. If they don't trust AI, then they won't allow AI to be deployed. And this is a big barrier we see today. So for example, no one wants to be, the CIO who deploys an AI system to help manage an IT network and then takes down a huge network and cripples a system. So, system owners have to believe that and be comfortable that AI isn't going to compromise their missions. And then often there are issues of public trust as well. DoD saw these issues crop up around Project Maven, where people weren't really trusting that AI was going to be used in a way that would be leading to kind of outcomes they were comfortable with. And there was a lot of public pressure that led some large companies to stop participating in Project Maven. So, the public has to trust AI as well. Again, we see this at Leidos because we, among other AI projects, build all the airport scanning systems that people walk through and get scanned with millimeter waves. And if humans don't believe that the AI treats them fairly, then they won't be comfortable, interacting with systems like that. So public trust is really important as well. And again, we've seen all these kinds of failures of AI trust happen. So we really focus on how do you build AI that humans trust, and how do you kind of have a methodology even for introducing AI in a way that will build that human trust.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I have a different example. The sensors, for example, in cars, my mother is of a different generation. She does not trust them. She says, you need to look in your blind spot. On the other hand, my teenage daughter, I'm grateful she relies on them. So, but to that point, since human trust is in AI is so important, how do you actually build those systems that humans can trust, and how do you present them and get them to trust and work, the human machine team in a process?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, and it's something we think about a lot here at Leidos. So we have a kind of a process we've developed based on having built trusted AI solutions for over a decade now, and we've seen what works and what doesn't. Part of the answer is technology. So we've developed, for example, a technology framework that has different components to deal with things like AI security, so that your AI systems can't be attacked by adversarial AI, resiliency to make sure that your AI systems don't do really strange things when they encounter data that they've never seen before, and fairness and explainability, all these good characteristics we want in our AI systems. So that's the technology side, but there's also a really important methodology side. You gave the example of self-driving cars or kind of automotive technology, and it's such a great example because the truth is, you can't successfully introduce AI in most cases as kind of the fully autonomous system being the first thing that humans encounter. You really have to walk through a series of steps. So what we find works is you start with AI that usually provides useful information to humans, kind of an analytical capability, and that might be in a car situation, say predicting how much mileage, how many miles you can go before you need a tank of gas, right? You start learning to trust that. And then you start to learn cases where the AI is assisting you a little more. Things like helping you see if, things you could do before, like check your behind your car and see if there was something behind your car, or if there was a car in your blind spot. Then maybe augmented capabilities, like the way that my car helps me understand if I'm about to drive out of my lane. That's a mistake I might make, and the AI helps me not make it, or helps me not back up and run into another car in front of me. Until finally we get to these kind of fully autonomous cars that we're starting to see on the road today. But without those baby steps, humans don't develop the trust that they need. And so we try to use that formula wherever we can to help establish organic human trust, and it really works well.
Ron, thank you so much for your time and for the important work that you're doing around AI at Leidos and with the Defense Department. Thank you, Leidos, for making this event possible. I hope you'll stay with us for our next session. That's all the time we have right now for this conversation. For Defense One, I'm Daniela Fayer. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Danielle.